And so now we're not in it. We can look back, and in emergencies, what's very, very necessary is to look back and post-mortem, to evaluate what did we do, what happened, what went wrong. Several organizations have acted as first movers, reinstituting mask mandates as a new strain of COVID makes its way to the United States. While 2020 now seems like a different lifetime to most of us, we do remember living through lockdowns, mandates, distancing, and the erasing of millions of non-essential jobs. With all that we now know about COVID, will we see a government mandate again? And if so, what will the reaction be from the American populace? So Lionsgate Entertainment, they instituted some kind of mask mandate. I do think they've actually backed off of that. Now, Morris Brown College, there's all kinds of rumors that it's coming back to the TSA and then it's going to come back to the airports. And some of these are very spurious rumors. There are a lot of people talking about it. There was a CNN article that came out. Is it time to bring the masks back? And all of this seems like we're headed to some version, or at least debates around whether or not it's time for the second round of COVID. And this is like the sequel that nobody is asking for. COVID Part 2, even COVIDier, lockdowns 2, electric boogaloo. Like what's the actual plan, not just for implementing this, but what is the plan for convincing the American populace? And I wonder, you can sound off in the comments, do you think people will go for this? Do you think they will remask in public places? Do you think people would be willing to quarantine or, 14,000 days to slow the spread or whatever that looks like? We'll look at this report. It says, President Joe Biden said Friday he'll ask Congress for additional funding for the development of a new COVID vaccine. The president announced his request for more funding while speaking to reporters as he vacations in Lake Tahoe, California. I signed off this morning on a proposal we have to present to the Congress, a request for additional funding for a new vaccine that is necessary and that works. Biden, according to the Associated Press, adding, it will likely be recommended that everybody get it, no matter whether they've gotten it before or not. Very interesting to say we're going to make a vaccine that works. I don't know what that's supposed to imply, but it's interesting you said that. Pfizer and Moderna are currently working on new vaccines to fight the latest Omicron strain, as some scientists warn of rising COVID cases. At the end of July, COVID hospitalizations were just over 9,000. That's only a fraction of the admissions that were seen during the height of COVID and later surges. The slight rise in COVID cases has caused some businesses and universities to reinstate mask mandates. So there is about 2 years of data now. What we now know, not just about COVID as a virus, but what we know about the measures that we took initially to try and fight this thing off. If you have held any kind of leadership position, you've probably led through some kind of tension or some forms of emergency. And if you have led at any level and have led through emergency, then you should have some level of grace for how difficult it is when you're in the thick of an emergency. The whole thing started under Trump. The first half of all the lockdowns and mandates were under Trump. The second half were under Biden. It was highly divisive, highly political. People were very heated. There's like endless Instagram videos of people screaming at each other in restaurants and stores, and everyone kind of lost their mind and nobody really knew what was going on. And what's so difficult about it is it's hard to, in the moment, have the data necessary, especially for something that is very scientific by nature, when you're in it. And so now we're not in it. We can look back, and in emergencies, what's very, very necessary is to look back and post-mortem, to evaluate what did we do, what happened, what went wrong. The tension when we were in the thick of it was, this is America, we should lean towards freedom. And the other side of the tension was public safety. And those two things, at least seemingly, were at odds at times. And different people of different political persuasions fell on different sides of that tension, and it created a lot of tension and it created a lot of division. Now we have looked back, and here's some things that we know. A lot of promises that we were made about the vaccines just simply did not happen. We were told very clearly that the initial ones will work. That's what Biden said about the new ones. We're going to make new ones and it will work. Now, he's going to have to define what work means, because initially the vaccines were defined as you will not catch it at all and you cannot pass it to other people. And neither of those things were true. Like those weren't true. We know that now. People treated masks, even cloth masks, homemade masks, like they were the answer. And we now know definitively that they just were not. That was not the answer. That was not what was going to save us. There's a major new study that shows masks don't stop the spread of COVID. The COVID pandemic is in the rearview mirror. We have plenty of data about it, including studies telling us how well our countermeasures worked. A dozen scientists from around the world conducted a massive meta-study of our efforts to fight COVID, as well as similar efforts to fight the flu, and they published the results in the Cochrane database of systematic reviews. The authors examined 78 different studies on the efficacy of different mitigation efforts, such as masking, distancing, screening, quarantining, and hand washing. And so how do these interventions affect the spread of the flu, COVID, or similar viruses? The studies included were diverse. They covered epidemics as well as periods of low transmission. Most important was what they had in common. They were all randomized controlled trials, or at least cluster randomized control trials. So what did they find? For starters, hand washing was effective in stopping the spread. But here's the most eye-opening finding. Wearing masks in the community probably makes little or no difference to the outcome of influenza-like illness / COVID-19-like illness compared to not wearing masks. In other words, masks did not do much, if anything. Now, they did. I actually went through and read this study. Not a scientist. Let's put that out there. If you did, am I a scientist? No, I'm not. Nothing close. I'm a preacher. I did read this study to the best of my ability. And here's what it found. Social distancing was made up. And people have admitted that now. 6 feet, that was just something that was made up. The masks, I think a lot of people really believed that they worked. There was a lot of evidence, especially anecdotal evidence, coming out pretty early on that the masks were not going to be effective unless they were KN95 or P2 respirators, I think what they're called, and they're worn correctly, which we don't know how to do. Doctors know how to do it. They actually take classes on the protective gear that they have to wear, and they learn how to do it, and we don't know how to do it. And no one was teaching us how to do it. And most people aren't going to wear KN95s, because I wore one for 1 week when we had COVID in our house, and I had a freaking scab on the edge of my big schnoz here for like 6 months. I was obviously wearing it wrong, or that's just what it does or something. I don't know. But masks out in the community are not working. Social distancing is made up and is not working. And we also looked back in this postmortem of what happened, and we found what sounds quite obvious, which is that locking people down in their homes, separating them from their communities, not allowing them to be there when their parents died, missing birthdays, missing funerals, postponing weddings, all of that had dire effect. And there have been a lot of people who have looked back just statistically at this and said, even if it did move the needle on COVID, the deaths of despair and the depression and the loss of income and the loss of savings and the closing of businesses, it's a hard case to say that these really equaled each other out. And so what is our role? And specifically as believers, what is our role knowing what we know? Because one of the things that Christians have to remember, and we should all live this way, is it's always wrong to lie. Telling the truth is always the kind and appropriate thing to do. And it's not just that we tell the truth, but how we tell the truth that matters. I think there's a tension here between what Jesus said in Matthew 5, an appropriate tension to manage. Blessed are the peacemakers. This is a part of the Beatitudes where Jesus basically takes the way the world is understood and the way power hierarchies are created and just flips it over and turns it on its head. Blessed are the peacemakers. And in Acts, where the apostle says, we must obey God rather than men. Now, that was a very, very direct moment of the government of Israel trying to stop them from telling people about Jesus. And they just said, we have to obey God. We have to do what is right. We have to follow our conscience in taking care of our communities. We know what it does to quarantine people to take people's jobs away. We know and can't pretend like we don't know that many of the measures we implemented and some people are beginning to re-implement are silly and not effective. And so we've got to manage this. Everyone should be allowed to speak their piece. Christians need to be vocalizing their thoughts and their ideas. I do that on this podcast, try to do it respectfully. I try to do it in non-divisive ways, although people have gotten after me in the comments when they don't agree with me. And I appreciate that. You definitely don't have to agree with me. I'm doing my best to look at these current issues through the lens of what I believe about Scripture, and I hope it's helpful to some of you. But we have to do that as peacemakers. Our primary instructions, Jesus said, all of the law can be summarized like this: to love God and to love people. And as the rest of the New Testament spells that out for us, here seems to be the way that actually functions. The way that you love God, the primary way you demonstrate your love to God, is by how you love the people around you, how you love his children. And not just the people you like, and not just the people who vote like you, and not just the people who have your same ideas about COVID and COVID measures, all people in all places. And so I'm going to hold to my convictions through this, and in the things I'm responsible for, which specifically are my family and the leadership of MetaChurch. I'm going to hold to the convictions and to what we know now based on the data, but I'm going to do it absolutely as loving and appropriately and non-divisively as I can. And I hope you'll consider doing that same thing. I hope you enjoyed this clip from the Clayton Tyner podcast. If you want to watch the full podcast, you can check that out somewhere right around here. And if you want to subscribe, you can do that right over here somewhere. Also, you can follow me at Clayton Tyner. That's Tyner on Twitter and Instagram. I would love for you to subscribe to the channel so you can keep up with everything that we're doing.